Well, welcome everyone to the Rita Theater. Oh, this is such a thrill to see so many people here. Oh my goodness. Kathy Dugan, isn't this wonderful? Yes. She told me back in, I guess it was March, or we talked about Louise and how many stories she tells, and all true. I don't mean stories like
most of them.
Yeah. And I said I could just listen to her stories, and Kathy says, I know, we should have a tea party. And I said, a tea party? And she says, yes, and gather all the women together, and we'll all get together. I go, we could go to the theater. Yes, and we started brainstorming. Well, then started thinking a little bit more and thought, no, we should invite everybody, because everybody needs to hear this. So I thought, I should ask Louise, what do you think she would want? So I said, Louise, I would really like to invite the town and anybody. We'll put it on Facebook, we'll put it in the paper, we'll send out invitations to all the people you want to, your relatives or whatever, anybody you want to get that. And I said, but I really want it to be, can we have men? And she said, oh. I might embellish just a little bit once in a while in my life, but she did say, there's some stories I might not be able to tell. And I said, oh no, you tell them. All right, all kidding aside, that is partially true. Most of it is true. We dreamed of having her here to share her stories. And so finally, when summer got here, we started just calling, and she said, all right. And we picked a date, and today is the day. And so I'm so thrilled. I'm so thrilled to have this here and have you here, Louise. You are loved, you are admired, you have great wisdom, sage wisdom, and I'm just so glad you're here. So, welcome everyone. I know you're here to see her, so I'm going to just tell you a few things. After she's done, there will be a time for questions. If you have a question that she doesn't answer in her talk, or you're just curious about something else that she might know, then we'll have a time for that. Madison Porter is going to be our person that walks around with a microphone. If you don't want to ask the question, you want to tell her, she'll be glad to do that. Louise has agreed to answer any of those. And afterwards, we do have cake. There's a cake, but it's not for you. It's for her. But there are cookies and punch out there, and we just want you to visit. There's a board out there that features her and some pictures of her that is just delightful. It's just wonderful. And so just enjoy. There's no time limit. You don't have to sit there and, well, it's done, I guess we have to leave. No, visit with each other, visit with her. I think it'll just be a wonderful afternoon. So the other thing I'm supposed to plug is we do have a melodrama coming up the 1st of August, 2 weeks from today. If you want melodrama tickets, we will sell those through the window if you're interested in that. But that's beside the fact. So welcome everyone. I hope you have an enjoyable afternoon here listening to a wonderful, wonderful woman, Louise Rahll.
Well, I'm thrilled that you're here. I haven't had this many people since I played Cyrano de Bergerac in a girls' school. Don't you know that was good? As many of you know, I was born here, and I'm full of tales about early Dalhart that some of you may know, but I think possibly I'm the oldest person here. I feel it. But early in the morning on November 27th, 1926, a siren went off, and I thought, oh, isn't that nice? They're announcing my birth. But it was the fire truck around the corner. So I was born at the end of Main Street, where Good Samaritan has been. There was no hospital in Dalhart at that time, and a Dr. Dawson had a clinic there. And many people were born there. A hospital was being built, and it was the Loretto Hospital of nuns from Chicago were building it. It was finished, soon after I was born, I guess. And they owned it for a number of years. And then Uncle Dick, he wasn't my uncle, unfortunately, but Uncle Dick Kuhn had set up a trust fund to have a hospital in Dalhart. So eventually the sisters sold to Coon Memorial, and it's doing fine, still there happily. I know it was early in the morning because a story I heard later. We were living in the country on the farm, and when it was close to Mother's due date, she came in and stayed with Daddy's brother and wife, Aunt Margaret and Uncle Ab. And she had apparently went to the hospital early in the morning, and one of their 3 boys jumped in the nice warm feather bed, and one of the brothers said, "Don't get in there, you might catch what Aunt Nellie has." We lived on the farm until I was in the 3rd grade, but one of those years, maybe it was to have a break from the Dust Bowl and the Depression. I don't know if they went together at different times, but it was all a bad time. We moved to California, to Glendale, and rented a home there. And Jay Peoples' grandmother was my oldest sister. And those of you who know me know I'm going to do this. Oh, boo. I thought I wouldn't. I'm not a professional, as you see. Anyway, we moved to Glendale, California, and Catherine started to college. My parents were hopeful that all of us would have a college education, which was pretty tough in the Depression. So she went to school at Glendale Junior College, and I started 1st grade. Then we came back at 2nd grade, and at that time they had decided all bus students had to go to Kelly-Hill. We had 3 grade schools, Kelly-Hill, North Ward, and South Ward. So I rode the bus. And I thought a little boy on that bus was so cute. And I must have talked about him at home. And we had memory books. Did any of you have a memory book? Okay, it's full of wonderful poetry. I love you little, I love you big, I love you like a little pig. It's in here twice. I'm just going to pick out a couple of them that I think are funny. If any of you remember Bill Chestnut, he hadn't been gone that long, but his sister wrote, "Remember this and bear in mind, a rooster's tail sticks up behind." Or, when you get married and have twins, don't come to me for safety pins. One more, I found one day a message from Charles, and it said, "Oh, I'm so glad we ride the school bus together. I like you a lot. Love, Charles." And I was too young to recognize my father's writing. Anyway, and at Kelly-Hill in the 2nd grade, our room was right next to the office. And often there was no one in the office. They must have taught also. The phone would ring, and Miss Farble will say, "Louise, go answer the phone." Get this, Kelly-Hill School, But if they wanted to speak to somebody, I'd go find them. I thought it was hot stuff to get to do that. Then we moved into town, and I went to South Ward. And this memory book continues. It started in 34 and goes through the 5th grade at South Ward. And it's fun. to read. So back to Dalhart. It was a wonderful place to grow up. It was safe, and kids just had fun. We had, as I got older, we had so many dances, every opportunity. There was a drugstore called Bob West Drug that was later Henry's Flowers, but it had 2 booths and a jukebox in the back. We'd get a 10-cent Coke and dance all afternoon. High school was fun. I was there my freshman year. My sophomore year, I went to Dallas and lived with my grandmother. And I went to Highland Park High, that at that time, and maybe still, it was rated one of the 10 best high schools in the country. So that was a nice opportunity, but I found out I was shy and bashful. I grew up with everyone, and it never occurred to me to have to make a friend. So I had a good year, but I didn't have as much fun as I should have. I didn't quite get over the shyness. I came back my junior year. Well, now, high school in Dallas. I was there December 7th, 1941. Bad time. I came to Dalhart my junior year and had a great year, but wartime was going and our lives changed. Everybody's life changed. They started building the Dalhart Army Air Base. It was before it was the Air Corps. It was the Dalhart Army Air Base. And 2 ladies in town, Mrs. Rosalie Elliott, and she and her husband owned the DeSoto Hotel, and a woman named Nancy Bell had someone make sandwiches, and we went out to the base to sell sandwiches. They built a little kiosk. In my day, you didn't get a Social Security card until you had a job. Mine says Louise Childers, canteen worker. And I still have that. Dalhart had many nice shops. There was a J.C. Penney, C.R. Anthony, United, and jewelry stores, and a lot of things. Mother had a friend, I think she worked at United, and she would call Mother when they got a shipment of Shirley Temple dresses. Now, can't you see me with this kind of hair, and as opposed to Shirley Temple in her little ruffled dresses and things, but I was happy. Oh, let me get my notes about Dalhart. We had 8 passenger trains a day. 1 in the morning, 1 in the evening, going all 4 directions, and I rode trains on all of them. I went from Dalhart to Dallas, Dalhart to Denver, where I went to college, Los Angeles, and Chicago, where I went to college. I went to high school later. It was wonderful. The beautiful dining rooms with all the pretty crystal and linen tablecloths and napkins. So that was, I didn't know I'd miss it so much as I do now. Need my glasses. Speaking of the railroads, at the end of 7th Street and the railroad, there was a big water tank to furnish water for the steam trains. So when I went to Dallas, my first trip home, the train stopped, and I thought they're taking on water. I heard people talking. I nearly missed the station. It was a diesel train and went on to the depot. I probably would have ended up in Texline. But anyway, the post office was on Denrock, a couple of blocks down. It was long and narrow. And Mormon's grocery store was on Denrock. Along then, sometime they had the first XIT, which was called XIT Rodeo and Reunion. There were lots of cowboys still living that had worked on the on the ranch, and they started XIT for a reunion for those men. Then later it was their families that came, and now it's just a XIT rodeo. But it was a lot of fun. I attended the first one, and they had a pageant out on the grounds of Kelly Hill. I was pretty young, 8 or so, and I was in the pageant, one of hundreds. I have no idea what I did. But the DeSoto Hotel, you've all heard of that, and maybe some of you were still living here when we had the DeSoto. But it had a very nice dining room and coffee shop. We lived further on down Denrock, and I'd look around, Daddy would be gone. He'd gone down to the DeSoto for a cup of coffee, and several cattlemen had their offices there. So he would visit with them. Now just think of the used to be Mission Hotel, Mission Theater, down at the end of the block and on up to the corner, coming this way, which was the DeSoto. In between there was Wolf Drug. It was just a pharmacy. Henry's Flowers, a barber shop, Mamie Vining, that's another story, and then the theater. So all of them were very small. Then next to the theater was a little office that now is a part of the whole building. And I was walking to town one day, and it was the insurance office. I saw a woman smoking. Well, I went down to the DeSoto and then came right back and, would look. I'd go past the courthouse, come back and look. And then Tracy White just told me that I remembered there had been a beauty shop there. And Tracy White just told me the other night out at the X10 that her grandmother had a beauty shop there. I remember it, but I didn't know her grandmother. Above nearly every building downtown was a lawyer's office. They were 2 lawyers had their offices above what was Henry's Flowers. All along the next block, there were apartments on both sides. There were apartments on top of Mission Theater. There was a lot going on. On Saturday nights, and I don't know how long this went on, and we didn't go every week, but people would come to town and park on Denrock, and many of them had their special places to park. You knew just where they were going to be. And then people would visit up and down the street, which was, really quite nice. The Mission had, I remember Sunday and Monday were their first run movies, then Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday they changed, and then Friday and Saturday. During the war, when there were lots of airmen here, I I was hired as an usher because people couldn't find a place to sit. I got in free. Good idea. Back to my memory book. Gene Autry came to town one time for an event at the mission, and he came over to South Ward, and he signed my memory book. I went to junior high on Oak Street. I imagine some of you did too. It burned down at one time, and not while I was there. I again, kind of a forerunner of the drive-ins to like Sonic and that kind of drive-in. We would go and double park at Wanzer's Drug, honk the horn, and they would come out, get your order. So that was pretty good, but I don't think you could get away with it now. Wartime, Dalhart was filled. It started as a glider base, and I think whoever did some research missed the wind that was so high, and they had several bad crashes, and the whole crew killed. So they moved the gliders and then brought in B-17s, and that's when crews got together. They came from all around and were assigned a plane, and the crew got together for the first time. So naturally, parents, girlfriends, wives, everyone came to Dalhart to see them before they went to overseas from here, I'm pretty sure. So Dalhart was already filled to the brim. People made garages into living conditions. We had a spare bedroom. My mother worked at the DeSoto Hotel as a bookkeeper, so she met these people frantic for a place to live, and several times they would come spend the night at the house. But also, when I went to a school in Chicago, my senior year, I brought a friend home with me, and we were sitting in our living room, and the front door opened, and a lady came in and said, "Hello." She went over to the piano and took some music out. "Goodbye." Kay said, "Who was that?" I said, "I have no idea." At the same time, sitting in the living room, the back door opened. "Hello, yoo-hoo, I'm just returning Miss Childers' iron." Went out, and Kay said, "Who was that?" I said, "I don't know." And Mother would tell people, "Our house is open. Just, go practice the piano, whatever." So I must say Dalhart was very welcoming. There were some fine people here, and we had USO dances and officers' club dances, and there were several people who married and remained in Dalhart, and one of them was Pete Scardello, who married Fanny Culbertson. Later on, they had a dress shop downtown where the bakery is now, next to Ropes. And if you think of that building, it was long and narrow with showcase windows on either side, and the door was set way back. So naturally, the dust whirled around in there every day, and I think Pete paid 50 cents to one of our dear, what am I trying to say? He was a wino. And harmless. We called him Cross-Eyed Mac. Not to his face, but cross-eyed Mac. He would come down the street like this and saying, fair and square, fair and square. But Pete paid him to sweep the front of the building every day. I was home for college, and he came up. I was there at the desk. He came up and he said, write this. And he waited till I wrote every word. The last time I seen you, you was driving a horse. I got down to that and I said, Mac, I can't spell. And he said, and you've been to college. I had a couple of temporary jobs before I got a real one. And my first one must have been my junior year. I worked at Dalhart Federal Savings and Loan. Some of my friends got jobs at the Air Base driving the officers around. They were in the, that was their job, just driving the officers someplace. But my mother didn't think that was a good place. It would have been fine. But I worked at Dalhart Federal, made $60 a month, I think. And the first thing I did was buy a coat. I remember it. But I've thought through my life, until Jean taught me better, every penny I made went on my back and or a trip. At the end of my senior year, I was president. I better check the time. I was president of the student body at a woman's liberal arts college in Denver, and the president of the student body got a letter that they were offering a 3-month trip to Europe for $600, a ship over and back. And my mother, bless her, she was wonderful, but she was, I think, a frustrated traveler, never did get to do much with 6 little girls. By the way, 6 girls, my father, farmer, and not a tomboy in the group. But he never, ever indicated that he wished he had a son, and I love him for that. Anyway, Mother said, oh yes, you can go. We went over on ship, and there were 90 college kids from all around the country. And the students in England, France, and Holland were our hosts. And we stayed in private hotel rooms in small hotels in the neighborhoods of the universities. But anyway, we sailed from Quebec, whatever. And I went to Washington, D.C. to see my sister and her family, and then took the train to Quebec. And I went into the club car and was sitting there, and a man sat down next to me and started visiting. And he said, are you on the student tour? And yes, I was. He leaned over and very quietly said, take plenty Kotex. I was wishing the track would swallow me. And he had a daughter going, and I think he had picked me out as a safe-looking friend. And on the pictures they have in back is a picture of Betty and me in Holland. And we remained friends till her death a few years ago. But anyway, to our father's defense, he had traveled to Europe after the war a few times, and knowing his daughter was going, he investigated things, and luckily for me, everything was very inferior. And the toilet paper was like old crepe paper that they used to put around pot plants. But anyway, so he mentioned that too. But that's the story I got okay from Tammy. So anyway, Betty was a great friend. Most of the kids we met, had lived through, this was 1948, so the war was over, but things weren't back to normal at all. And many of them had risked their lives in the underground. And I was home, gas rationing, couldn't buy all the shoes I wanted, and butter was awful, and I felt kind of guilty. I didn't want to be in the middle of it, but I felt guilty. Another job I had was at KXIT, and they were just organizing. Oh, they had several announcers and people out for the secretary, and a lot going on. And I was hired to give the Society News of Dalhart. I made $60 an hour, worked 45 minutes a week. Later, I had a job with the college I had attended as admissions counselor, and I traveled around the country talking to prospective students. After a while, I felt like I'd never left college. So I had met a wonderful lady in Chicago who headed a talent agency for radio and television. Radio was just fading out. The Jack Armstrong, the All-American Boy, and Ma Perkins, and all those serials were moving to New York or California, and some of them would come in looking for jobs. John Deere Company at that time did a full-length movie and had John Deere Days, and we cast all of those movies for John Deere, did a lot of commercials. I shared an apartment in Chicago with two girls and said the only time Louise looks at television is during commercials, but that isn't quite true. But it was a wonderful job, and I did that for a while, and then my mother became ill, and I came back to Dalhart, and I was the only one of 6 girls not married, and I thought, oh, surely my father needs me. And I was going back to Chicago to work or to Denver, and I just kept staying. Luckily, I did, because I met Gene. He saw me in church. So let that be a lesson. And again, I made use of every vacation. And Bobby Word, who's here today, I'm so thrilled. I worked with her. Every vacation, I made the most of it, but this is the silliest. I left the minute the bank closed. I was working at Citizen State Bank. I was supposed to stay 3 months, and I stayed 8 years. I took a plane to Washington, D.C., stayed, we went to the shore. From there, rented a place. I took the train to New York City, saw a Broadway show on Tuesday night, a Broadway matinee on Wednesday, and a Broadway show on Wednesday night. Then took the train to Connecticut to see another sister, and then went home. Well, the plane I was on landed in Denver, and at that time, there was a middle-of-the-night flight from Denver to Amarillo. I caught that, got on, called a taxi, went to the bus station, took a bus, and it landed it stopped at the Shamrock Hotel, that's an empty block now. I took my suitcase, walked cat-a-corner across the street, and got to work on time. And Ray Kaler, who was president of the bank, said, "Louie, did you get caught in the propeller of the plane?" And I imagine I looked at, but I was back on time. Back to being bashful. When I went to Highland Park High, I was bashful. So then my senior year, I went to Chicago, and I was determined I wasn't going to be so backward. Well, the song Pistol Packin' Mama had just hit Chicago, and I was the only one from out of state, and I was from Texas. They'd say, "Do you know Pistol Packin' Mama? Lay that pistol down." Pretty soon, everybody knew me. Probably thought that hick. Oh, I think I'm not supposed to be waving and carrying on. Am I okay? Oh, you're not there. Well, I must be all right. Here it is. Anyway, those of you who have heard me try to sing the B-I-B-L-E know I don't have a voice. Okay. Is this okay down here? Where is the man? Okay. All right. Not having any brothers, I had no one in service during the war, but lots of good friends. And Dalhart lost some of their prize young men just right off the bat. And I'll bet not many of you have noticed a bust of a serviceman on the grounds of the courthouse. It's facing east, but it's right in front of the XIT Museum. And the war had been, in fact, the war had been over a long time. Gene was mayor when he was approached by some men to ask if they knew a James Fox. Oh, no. Well, of course he didn't. He wasn't from around here. And then I remembered Jim Fox, who was a friend of my sister's, and he had flown the hump during the war, helping out the Chinese who had been surrounded by Japanese, and they were cut off from civilization. So Jim was one of the pilots, and one man who had survived all of that badgered the Chinese until they recognized what the Americans did for them. So they finally decided they would, and they made a bust of Jim and presented it at the George Bush Library in College Station. And we were invited to come, and there were generals. Chinese couldn't speak a word of English with all their badges and awards and stuff. But then they said they wanted to use it a little bit before they brought it to Dalhart. But they eventually did put it on the courthouse lawn and had another ceremony. But if you've never noticed that, that's what it is, and I think it's great. Peter Priestley's uncle he went to A&M, and the minute the war was out, the men went into service, and he was an officer at A&M, but he was over in the Philippines and was captured by the Japanese. And as the Americans were getting back to to the Philippines, they put them on a ship and were going to take them someplace, but they did not mark it as a prisoner ship, so the Allies bombed it and everyone was killed. But there were several other wonderful people who were killed, and then many, many, many came home. So that was great. You getting tired of me? No. I made notes, but I'm not following them very well. So, after I married Gene, he is from Oxford, Pennsylvania. So after 3 months in Australia, we went around the world and came back on the East Coast instead of where we started, Dalhart. And Gene needed to go back to work. It was the New Holland Machine Company that had hired him to go down to Australia and set up a testing program. So my sister Frances flew home with me, and I drove back with my car, and I had wedding gifts and a little bit of furniture. I was going to put it on a moving van, and somebody said, "It'll go in the corner of the van, you won't see it for months." Said, "Why don't you take a U-Haul?" I said, "Oh, Daddy wouldn't let me do that." Well, Daddy did. And we set out in February. I did all the driving, but it was comforting to have Frances there. As I was leaving the garage at home, the driveway, both Daddy and X.A. Austin, who worked in the flower shop for Catherine, told me, "Remember, you can't back up," because I didn't know how to back up a trailer. Well, every gas station, every restaurant, every motel, I had to figure out a way to just drive in where I could drive out. But we made it, and I dropped Frances off someplace, and her husband came to pick her up, and I went the last half day or so, left the Pennsylvania Turnpike onto a small state road right behind an Amish buggy, and no way to get around it. It was just a 2-lane road, and I thought, well, where am I? What's going on? Gene and I did a lot of traveling. Oh, he decided he didn't get married to live in a motel because they kept him traveling all the time around the country because he was not married. Well, he decided I didn't get married to live in a motel. I would go with him sometimes and sometimes not. So we heard of a new industry called rental. Before that, most of the rental was someone's garage that they'd rent a lawnmower or a floor sander or something. And we moved to Baltimore and had our grand opening on April 4th, 1968, the day Martin Luther King was assassinated. Baltimore, parts of it went up in flames. We were out in the county, but the city had a curfew at 5 o'clock, and we were staying with Gene's mother because our apartment wasn't ready. So we would have to close the business and go in to be off the streets by 5. And again, I thought, what am I into? But it turned out very successfully, and we grew from a mom and pop operation. Gene had the nerve to go to Chicago on business one time, and he left me in charge. And a man came in and wanted to rent a router. And I said, well, if you can find it, I'll rent it to you. I had no idea what a router was. We ended up with a lot of employees, truck drivers, mechanics, counter people, and I was the bookkeeper. And it was very successful. But after 15 years, Gene decided, he would say, Louise and I are going to live in the Southwest in a small town when Louise tells me where we're going. I said, this is not my decision. It's up to you. Where do you want to make a living? You're too young to retire. Anyway, after saying it twice, I said, well, if you want to move, blah, blah, blah. I said, why don't we go to Dalhart? He said, that's what I wanted to do, but I wanted you to say it. So that was very nice. I was thrilled to come home, but people would say, oh, you brought your husband to Dalhart. And I'd say, no, I didn't. He brought me. But I will say about Gene, he helped 6 or 7 young men get started in business. He helped them mentoring and financially. And one of them was Steve Berner at Rayburn Rental in Amarillo, who has done beautifully, and then scattered around a few other places, and he was named to the Hall of Fame to the National Rental Association. Gene and Louise went around the world on for his 50th birthday. We flew from New York to Casablanca, and while we were there, we decided we wanted to go to Marrakesh. So we rented a car and set out, very desolate-looking countryside. We saw a man plowing his field with a camel. And the ground was dry, but we got to about 20 miles out of Marrakesh, and the car started smoking. Well, we limped into a tiny little village that had a service station, but only sold gas, and a 12-year-old boy was in charge, and he couldn't speak English. A man came along who did speak English. He said, there's just one phone in town and it doesn't work. So he told us we should take a bus that was coming through pretty soon. It was one of those low-slung buses, a very local bus with chickens and stuff in it. And as we got to Marrakesh, they stopped in a huge square that has a name. It's famous, but I don't remember the name. And I said to Gene, we need a taxi to go to the hotel. And taxi? He had a cart and a mule, and that was the taxi. But anyway, we survived that. Another time, Gene and I have driven every country in Europe, most of it in a rental car with just the two of us. We've been to every country there. And going through the Balkan, I think it was Bulgaria, we stopped for gas, and as soon as we drove off, the car started smoking. The man had put diesel into the car. And the owner was saying, stupido, which I took for being stupid. And luckily, a man across the street had a pit, that they use in garages. It took forever. We had a full load of gas, and he had to drain all of that out. Another time we were going maybe to Romania, I've forgotten, but they were all under communist rule. And we got to the border, no other car there. They took our passports, disappeared, They came out and searched the car, took the seats out to look under them. They went under the car. It was nearly an hour before we got out of there. But almost any place we found someone that spoke English. And we didn't speak anything but English. That was not helpful. I've been in about 90-something countries. Gene has been in over 100. He took some strenuous trips that I couldn't have done. We visited all 7 continents, including Antarctica, and that was wonderful. You can't imagine the colors and the shapes of the iceberg. And we visited first the Falkland Islands, and I wondered why they fought over it. But the Antarctica and all that was fine, and Gene went swimming. There's an underground volcano in a small area that stays warm. And they had told us before, that could happen and have bathing suit or something, but he did go swimming in the Antarctic Ocean. One thing we did, still have a little time. One thing we did was to go with Claire and Ray Sneed to Churchill, Canada, to see the polar bear. It's become very popular now. I see it advertised, but at that time, there weren't that many visitors. And they had tundra buggies that were, big tires and lifted you way up off the ground so that the polar bear couldn't get to you. They had an observation on the back, but the polar bear would try to get to you, but it was just too high. And that was fun. But the little town of Churchill, the only way you could get there was by air or by sea. And cold, and I don't know, they furnished so many wonderful things for the few people that live there. Theaters and gym and schools and everything, but to live so isolated was kind of tough. I'm sure I didn't live it. And with the Sneeds, we also went to Oberammergau to see the Passion Play. That was a wonderful experience. We've traveled with Dyke and Terry Rogers, and they were also wonderful to travel with. We gone on a couple of cruises, but one I remember specifically ended in Singapore. And Gene and I, this was to be our 3rd trip to Singapore. And all cruise ships land early in the morning so people can go home. Well, Dyke had to get home. We'd been gone 2 or 3, a month or more. I don't know. But Dyke had to get home. Gene said, no, you can't go home. You have to stay at least 2 days in Singapore. Well, he decided he could, and he was wishing he had more than 2 days when that was up. It's a wonderful city. And then we've traveled with John and Margaret Colquitt 2 or 3 times. They were wonderful too, but I have to laugh when I think of Margaret. We were in Jakarta, Indonesia, at a restaurant, and she ordered a banana split. And I didn't say anything, but I thought, are you out of your mind? You're not going to have a banana split. But lo and behold, they showed up with a delicious one. We took a trip up the coast of Norway, and on the way saw the midnight sun. And I'd always heard of it, but I didn't know what to expect. The sun started coming down, got to the horizon, Then it kind of bounced along for a while, never set, and then it started rising again. So they were having 24-hour light, and then the next season there was 24 hours of darkness. But wonderful friends in Dalhart. And I wish I'd gone someplace with all of you, but we can't travel anymore. You see me with the cane, Jean with the cane, and that's tough. But I've had a wonderful life. And we never failed to be happy to come home. No matter what wonderful things had happened, we were glad to be home. And I still am. And I thank little Rita. This got all out of whack. There were going to be a few friends talking, and I'm thankful and pleased that so many people are here. Thank you. I also want to thank Kevin Cadell, who brought me a little place to live up here for an hour or so, and the people who came to work that wouldn't have been here today. I appreciate all that, and I appreciate all of you. Good to see all your faces. Thank you.
Okay, do we have any questions?
I think I can be heard.
You're good, yes.
I would like more of a description of what it's like to be downtown on Saturdays when you were in high school or
When the people parked, or when just
well, early in
us?
the day, what was it like on Saturday in downtown Dalhart?
Pretty crowded, both with grocery stores and the post office, and nearly every building full. You know, furniture store. We had several drug stores, maybe not all at the same time, but Bowers was downtown. They had a soda fountain. Some of them were just pharmacies, but and several restaurants, the Texas Cafe, the B&B Cafe, and of course the hotel. But I didn't mention, there were no houses past Texas Boulevard. That was all empty land. The hospital was one street over, just past, well, where it is now. And there was nothing beyond that except an American Legion Hall. And I've never known, but every Friday night we had a dance there. I don't know if we paid the Legion for it. I don't know who got the key, but it was just high school kids. And we never had any problems. I know some of the boys slipped out and had a beer or something, but oh, I was the drum majorette, lousy. All I knew was the figure eight and the salute. But Homer Herbert Jackson Jr. was the drum major, and poor Homer, I called it St. Vitus dance. I don't know, but his eyes moved all the time. And he was drum major, and he was good, except we'd be in a circle at an intersection. He'd throw up the baton, then we'd start looking for it. He was a wheeler dealer and was in and out of more businesses. Everybody liked Homer, but I don't think any of the girls wanted to date him, but we all liked him. He ended up being hit and killed by a hit-and-run driver. Bad. Okay, anything else? Or did I answer your question?
Louise, I've never heard you tell about your wedding day. Where'd y'all get married and all that?
The what?
Where did you get married?
Oh.
Tell us about your wedding day.
Well, I met Gene in January of '95, and he had been in Dalhart for a month or more, and had seen me in church at St. Anthony's, and he asked a mutual friend to introduce us, and she called and said, "Would you like to meet this man? He is so nice." And I said, "I don't know." Ask him to stop by the bank and have a cup of coffee. And he was leaving. That was on a Friday. And we went out to dinner on Saturday, and he left on Sunday. I didn't see him again for months, but he'd call me from all over the country. The company kept him moving a lot, but I saw him a few times. He called me one day, nearly Labor Day of '66, and said, "New Holland is sending me to Australia for 3 months. If we get married, you could go with me." That's unlike these days. They just don't. But we got married happily and stayed down in Australia for 3 months. And it was and we've been happily married for soon to be 58 years.
You are a fabulous cook, and you have a gift of hospitality. So it inspires some of us to get into cooking. How do you come up with your delicious meals, and how many have you cooked for Gene over all those years?
Well, I've cooked, first of all, when we started the rental business, we were closed on Sunday. I cooked dinner every night except Friday, and we went, a big delight, we went to Big Boy's, if you know a Big Boy restaurant, and had dinner, and that was a delight. I continued cooking 6 days a week, but now he insists that I do very little cooking, and I'm happy to say that the grocery store has some wonderful prepared foods now, and he'll eat anything but boiled okra and cottage cheese. So he's easy to fit. I remembered something. My mother had my hair grow out from this deal in the 5th grade, and I've been at a hairdresser's mercy ever since. Never did learn to do my hair. So I was had to sit under a dryer till I started getting it blown dry. So I'd take a couple of these fake book covers to this one says pregnancy, its cause and its cure. Written by Justin Case. And people would look at that, here's a condensed history of fingernail biting by Venus de Milo. And they showed up sometime. I guess I've carried them around with me. And we used to have dinner parties, but I can't do that anymore. I love to entertain, and Gene he would have been happy having company every night for dinner. I wasn't that happy, but we did have a lot of dinner parties. My first date was in a Hudson Terraplane. Now, I doubt if many of you remember that, but the underpass wasn't brand new, but it was still pretty new. And we went under the underpass and back up, and he leaned over and kissed me, and I slapped him. The only time in my life I have slapped anybody. But I think the boys had that tradition that they could kiss the girl when you went under the underpass. And right now at XIT Museum, they have a display of hood ornaments from cars. I really had forgotten they weren't even using them. But some nice men from Kellyanne's hometown has a small museum, and they nicely brought it down to Dalhart, and it will be here until the end of this next week. But right in front, they put a Terraplane hood ornament. And the boy I slapped, we went together for years. Must not have been too hard.
I have a question. How was the Lake area going up the canyon back in the day? That area down there?
Oh, well, I didn't say much about my parents. They were wonderful, Dave and Nellie Childers. They came here around both families came. My mother's parents were named Carr, C-A-R-R, and both families came around 1910. Mother was the first child not of German descent born in New Brunswick. Everyone else, it was a German settlement, and my grandparents came from Ireland. So, and then my father came from Fort Deposit, Alabama, and my grandfather fought in the Civil War. And people say, no, that must have been your great or great-great-grandfather. I said, no, it's my grandfather. He was a lot older than my grandmother. I knew my grandmother, but I didn't. I knew both grandmothers, but neither grandfather. So the canyon, before they built the dam, there was a lot going. We had Tiptoe Ridge, I don't know where it is now, and some caves and different things. And we went down there as kids, but so did my parents. And Mother called it Kodaking. The only Kodak anyone had was a Kodak, the brand. And I have a lot of pictures taken down in the canyon where they went on Sunday or the weekend or something, Kodaking. And of course the women had big hats with the plumes and long dresses and high-top shoes, and they were wandering all over the canyon in that gear. Is that what you meant? Jay and I, Peoples, are the only two descendants living in Dalhart of the Childers family. And there were a gob of them. I had 3 uncles, an aunt and grandmother living here, 38 first cousins, and I'm the only one living out of all that mess. But Jay and I, unless there's a cousin hiding from me, are the only 2 left. And I like you, Jay. I'm happy.
I like it.
Thank you. That's a relief.
Calamity,
Oh, gosh. That's good.
I'm disappointed you didn't tell the world about our theatrical days right here in this building on that stage.
I was Calamity that owned the saloon, and Bill Crawford was my bartender.
I was supposed to be serving tea, and the last night I served the real stuff. and your family raised me, so I'm kind of kin.
Well, I remember it well.
Louise, since you were the social editor of KXIT, later there was a social editor for the Dalhart. Mrs. Gibney.
Yeah, well, she was there then. I mean, she came long ago.
And I think you probably gave her lessons, so you told her how to get into the power, I'm sure. Tell us how that worked.
Well, I'm not sure what you mean, but 45 minutes, 3 15-minute programs of society news gets pretty tough. So a lot of them were bridge tournaments or bridge parties or luncheons or something. I got kind of desperate. So I started going out to Rita Hospital and interviewing new mothers and ask what their favorite song was. Then I'd play the song and dedicate it to them. I did that a bit. Then I got club women. I'd interview the presidents. We had a lot of women's clubs then, and I guess men's too, and bring their favorite recipe. So I still have some of those recipes that are very good. Is that what you mean?
Mrs. Gibney with her.
Oh, Mrs. Gibney. I know a lot of you remember Mrs. Gibney, Lisa Hanbury's grandmother. She reported everything. And one that still amuses me, I cut it out of the paper, Mrs. D.R. Childers injured in fall. Okay, it was at Mormon's on Main Street, and Mother walked down from our house farther down on Denrock, and she saw some peach preserves. Well, she thought about that and thought they were a little expensive, so she passed them up. Well, before she left, she went back and bought the peach preserves, checked out, went out on the sidewalk and slipped on some ice and broke the peach preserves. They wrote that up in the Texan. And everything. She would, they never write up weddings anymore. And she would tell everything about a shower and the wedding. My junior-senior prom was at the old Methodist church, over here they built the new one. The basement was the only place in town large enough to accommodate the junior-senior banquet. And the year I was a junior, she wrote up what every girl wore, and who her escort was, and even the girls that didn't have a date, she worded it in a way that didn't make them sound like a wallflower. It was sweet and nice, but she also belonged to St. Anthony's Church and was always late. And she had 2 little girls, and she sat on the front row, but she was always late, and you knew she was coming, but she just didn't get there on time. Speaking of proms, all of my proms, college, were during wartime, and I don't know how it happened, but I never missed having a date for a prom. But it must have been kind of tricky, I don't know.
Any other questions?
Louise, you spoke of when you were going to be born that you came in from the farm. Where was your family farm?
Oh, out on the Eder Highway, about where Daddy sold it later to Harold Hogue, and nothing looks like it did then. We had a bunkhouse, and the big barn and stuff is all gone. But it's right where that road turns to go to Hartley. And it doesn't look at all like it did. And it was exactly a mile from the McCluskey family. And I could visualize a mile would always be in my mind how far away the McCluskey house looked. And that's how I could decide how far a mile was.
So you didn't grow up up there, you lived in town.
Yes, actually, Daddy owned a house from the 30s, but we continued to live in the country until he got tired of driving Mary Helen or Catherine or Frances to town for basketball practice or play practice. He kept the house in Dalhart rented. And when I was in the second grade, into my second grade, we moved to town. And had a good time.
I remember you telling us that you saying that you didn't do your hair for a long time, but you had friends, you met a friend somewhere, and she came over here and wanted you to give her a perm. Gave her a permit.
Oh, when I was working at the college in Denver, I forgot to say, all of the kids we met in Europe were wonderful, but we had a better time with the Dutch students. And if any of the Mellamos are here, I want to say how great they were. But we met a young fellow our age who had a German father and a Dutch mother, and they divorced. And the Germans knew about him, and they forced him into the German army. And he, of course, did not like that. He managed after a while to escape and got to the Allies. Well, they weren't sure they trusted him, but he finally convinced them, and he was an interpreter for them. Well, he was back in Amsterdam, where he lived, and he was one of the hosts for us, and they wanted to have an American party, and all visitors in Holland had ration stamps for sugar and something else, I forgot. So our kids all gave up ration points to buy Cokes and beer and pastry, food, and rolled up the rugs at where he lived and had jazzy music. I don't know, and they all thought it was wonderful. But at the same time, he had a younger brother who was getting to be the age that the Germans would come looking for him, and they kind of kept him in hiding, not as much as Anne Frank, but same type of thing. And he did carving of wood just to pass the time. And when we were and I talked to him a good bit that night. And as we left Holland to go over to England, he came to the ship and gave me a little ship that he had carved during the war and presented it to me. And it meant a lot to me, except your sister-in-law said one day, Pam people steal, said, now if anybody, I ask family every once in a while, is there anything in the house you'd like to have? And Pam said, well, if nobody wants that, now if anybody wants it, now forget I said this, but I would like to have it. And I gave it to her then, and she's made a little box to put it in. But I had $300 to spend. I came home with a few dollars, not many. And there was a boy on ship that had he bought Argyle socks, we were in Scotland, Argyle sweaters, and he was trying to sell it because he had not a penny left over when we docked in New York. He didn't have a dime, or maybe it was a nickel, to put in a phone to call collect to his parents to send him some money. I gave him $5 maybe. And I was working in Chicago, and I ran across him on the street one day, which was he didn't even live in Chicago. He was visiting, and I was working there. But we ate a lot of bread and potatoes because food was not back regular, as it should have been, until we went to Switzerland and crossed over in the border, and there was white bread. We'd been eating tough old brown bread, and bread and potatoes and stuff. Well, chocolate, all of that was just wonderful. And I met Toblerone chocolate for the first time. I'd never seen it. So I was working back at the college after that trip, and one of the nuns was going to Europe, and she said, does anyone want anything? I'll bring it to you. And all the girls wanted a rosary blessed by the Pope and, holy cards and stuff. I said, yeah, would you bring some Toblerone chocolate? And she did. But now you can get it any place.
I knew it would be like this. I just knew it, and I just couldn't wait for it. So sorry, I think I talk loud enough, and I don't. So here's the microphone. We have punch, we have cookies, we have a board that has beautiful pictures of Louise. I know she'd probably love to see as many of you as she can, or just have you say hello to her. And it's just been a delightful time. This is a great idea, Kathy Dugan. This was a great idea for having all this come about. And we have been blessed, Louise. We have been blessed so much by you today. I've laughed, I've smiled, I've teared up.
It was fun for me. I'm sorry I cried. I can't help it.
I will tell you.
One woman said to me, I won't name her, but she was not from Dalhart. I found out one of my brothers-in-law was at the point of death. He didn't die then, later. But I kind of cried, and I said to her, oh, I think it's my Irish background, because my mother cried easily too. This woman was more Irish than I was. But she said, I've always thought it was a sign of immaturity. So I'm not mature yet, but I'm
Either am I. Oh, it's been so wonderful, beyond my wildest dreams of what this could be like for you. And we're so thankful for you. Thank you for you. I really wanted to hear more of the love story with you and Gene, but he's said it, and you said some funny things, so I love that's part of your talk too about you and Gene and being together for 58 years, and it's amazing. Happily, too. That's when, yes. I think I ran into you all in an airport one time, and I said so, and it was late, and I don't know if you remember this, but I walked out, I said, so, now will y'all stop and get something to eat? She goes, oh, no. Jean likes to eat at home. I cook. I said, oh, okay. I think I'll learn how to do that. No. No. So I just thought that was really neat, because you said you cooked a lot, and I love that. So you're welcome. All right, everyone. So enjoy the rest of your day. Please stay as long as you want. Theater is open, and we are going to have refreshments in honor of Louise. And where is that Gene? Is Gene still in here? Where are you? Where is that man? Stand up, Mr. Gene. You got a good one.